Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 384 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our third book is called From Letters to Leaders, Leveraging Your Fraternity or Sorority Experience to Land Your Dream Job. So go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there's nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, I travel all over the country to do educational programming with college students on alcohol and drug abuse. But where we run into the most resistance, it's on marijuana. Since so many states have legalized it, students don't often understand the harms of using it. While everyone has the ability to make their own choices, and I firmly believe in that regarding marijuana use, I also think that it's important for college students to at least know the risks before they get involved with it. So let's talk a little bit more about this topic with our next guest. Seeing the devastating and deadly effects of marijuana in his patients, family, and friends, Dr. Raymond Wiggins began investigating the subject, and what he found shocked him. His search for answers revealed an overwhelming body of evidence showing the adverse effects of marijuana. Soon he found he was not alone. As people learned of his quest, many had similar stories of friends and family who had suffered harm or died from this drug. The stories are heartbreaking. Every story is fuel on a fire that cannot be quenched. This investigation has now become a passion to bust marijuana myths and spread the truth about this drug. He believes if he saves one life, it is worth the effort. His mission is to save as many people as possible from the physical, mental, and spiritual ravages of this drug. Welcome to the show, Dr. Wiggins.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
It is an honor to have you on the show to talk about an incredibly important topic, marijuana use on college campuses. And so I can't wait to jump into this, but I'm sure our college student listeners, they want to know a little bit of background about your upbringing and where you experienced college. So you went to SMU, Southern Methodist University, for your undergraduate experience. I love speaking on that campus. It is absolutely gorgeous. The last time I spoke on that campus, they had a little golf cart waiting to drive me from where I parked my car to the auditorium, which I just thought was the coolest thing, that they had somebody to meet me and drive me around, which is great. But why did you choose SMU?
Well, I grew up in the Dallas area, and SMU was the place that my friends and I all wanted to go. First of all, it had great academics and great athletics as well. A beautiful campus, as you said. And I remember the first time I visited thinking, wow, I have never seen so many beautiful young ladies in my whole life. I was hooked. Wanted to go there.
Yeah, I understand completely. There are some beautiful people on that campus. There's no question about it. And it's just stunning just to look around the campus. I mean, the place is spotless. They've taken a lot of time to really invest in the infrastructure, in the buildings, and the classrooms. I mean, I was just blown away at the amenities. It's just really, really nice. So if you're considering SMU, go and check it out in person. And I think you'll be blown away as well. Now, you have almost 3 decades on the front lines of healthcare. I want our listeners to understand that. You've sedated over 25,000 patients, and you're a former board member of the Texas Society of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeons. So what made you look into the effects of marijuana, of all things?
Well, I saw the devastating effects in my patients, my friends, and especially in my family members. I could literally fill a whole show and more talking about my family. I had 3 cousins that when we were growing up, they used a lot of marijuana, and today all 3 of them unfortunately are dead as either a direct or indirect consequence of this drug. And I have another family member, a great young man. He started college just a couple of years ago, and he had never smoked before. He got in with a group of guys when he got to school who were smoking marijuana. And after he did it just a couple of times, he had a psychotic break. And he started having paranoid delusions. He thought people were coming to kill him. He got in his car, unfortunately, and he started driving. After a few miles, though, he saw he couldn't drive well, so he abandoned his car, and he made his way to a gas station where the attendant there saw that something was wrong. And so he actually took this young man's phone and called. He called 911. He called this young man's mother, and the young man still paranoid, started running. He ran out into the woods, and finally the police found him and they took him to a hospital where doctors diagnosed him with marijuana-induced psychosis. And he spent time in a psychiatric hospital. Unfortunately, he was never able to return to school, and it was a direct result of the marijuana. And that's the personal side. Then you look at the professional side. I see anxiety in my patients who use marijuana. Almost all of them who check that they use marijuana also check that they have anxiety. And I'm not the only one that's seeing that. That's in studies as well. And there's also a 58% increase in the number of, or the amount of pain meds that people need to use after surgery. People think that it reduces pain. Well, when you come down from it, you actually have increased pain. And then lastly, the biggest issue in my practice is I sedate patients all the time. And we have to use somewhere between 2 to 3 times the anesthesia for patients who use marijuana. And that's borne out in studies as well. It shows somewhere between 2.5 to 3 times the amount of propofol that we have to use on these patients.
Yeah, this is really fascinating stuff. And I think especially, it's important that we hit college students with this information because their brain is developing at age 18. It's not like you're a full-on adult and your brain is complete in terms of its growth. It's not, it's growing. And when you hit that combination of marijuana with a brain that is actually developing, because let's face it, especially for men, I mean, our brain is not fully developed until 25. So you put those two things together, that's where we have a major issue, right?
I agree with you. Yeah, it really, if you look at studies, it's somewhere between 25 to 27. If you look at most of the studies, but there's actually a study from England that shows that our brain is still plastic, still developing a lot until we're in our 30s and 40s. So marijuana can really cause problems for a long time, and even after that, it can still cause problems, but especially when you're young.
Yeah, especially when you're young. I think that is really the message that's so important. But the issue that I have as a speaker who talks about these dangers is that so many students believe that marijuana is safe. It's obviously legal in many states. So the students are like, well, if it's so dangerous and what you say is true, then why have all of these states made it legal? And you found this abundance of medical literature revealing the harmful effects of marijuana. Talk to our audience a little bit more about what you found, and feel free to comment on the legality of marijuana in so many states.
Yeah, when you're talking about the harmful effects of marijuana, marijuana has devastating and potentially deadly effects, both on physical and mental health. First, if you want to look at the heart, there's just an absolute abundance of literature, and most of it's very new. A lot of doctors haven't even heard about this, and I hadn't heard about it. I'm a physician. I hadn't heard about this until I started looking into it a few years ago. But even since I started looking into it, there's a lot of new literature here. Marijuana causes inflammation in the bloodstream. It leads to an increase in blood pressure beginning within minutes after you start smoking it. And that lasts for several hours. And it also leads to an increase in your heart rate as well. And that really is not good for your heart. The increase can be up to 100% or double the blood pressure, which can lead to strokes and heart attacks. There was a study that was published by Stanford Medical School that showed that smoking marijuana 1 or more times a month leads to increased heart attacks, second heart attacks, heart failure, and sudden cardiac death in those under the age of 50. Heart attacks and strokes are really very rare under the age of 50, but with marijuana, it's actually becoming much more common. Harvard published a study that showed that there's a 4.8 times risk of having a heart attack the first hour after smoking marijuana, and a 2 times risk for 3 hours. There's another study that shows a 2 times risk for 24 hours. And the Mayo Clinic showed a 2.5 times risk overall of having a heart attack when they followed patients for 3 years. They followed young people who smoked marijuana and then young people who didn't smoke marijuana. And those who smoked marijuana were 2.5 times more likely to have a heart attack than those who weren't. I could go on and on about the heart effects. That's a really big one. Let's go on to the lungs. The American Lung Association says that marijuana damages the lungs. It leads to chronic cough, phlegm production, asthma, wheezing, bronchitis. And the European Respiratory Journal showed that 1 joint is equivalent to 20 cigarettes when comparing lung cancer risk. Another study showed that 15 to 20, one joint is equivalent to 15 to 20 cigarettes when comparing lung damage and inflammation. And the risk of lung cancer in someone who smokes marijuana moderately or heavy is 5.5 times that of those who don't smoke marijuana. And I could go on about the physical effects. So you can talk about immune system effects, genetic effects, fertility, decreased fertility in both men and women, the oral health effects. You can just go on and on. Let's talk about the mental health effects, though. That's a huge one for young people. It really causes damage to brains and causes increased anxiety, panic attacks, paranoia, depression, bipolar disorder, thoughts of suicide, attempted suicide, and schizophrenia. And those are all things that are not just casually related, but they're causally related. In other words, studies show that marijuana actually causes these things. And again, these are newer studies. Older studies couldn't really make that relationship. They couldn't really say, hey, marijuana really causes this. But now we're finding that marijuana is not just, somehow slightly related. It's really causally related. So let's talk about schizophrenia for a minute. Schizophrenia, if you start smoking marijuana before the age of 18, smoke it at all, you're 2.5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia later in life. If you smoke it 50 or more times within the first 15 years that you start, and you started before the age of 18, you have a 6 times risk of developing schizophrenia. There's another study that shows that for everyone who smokes marijuana, you have a 3.2 to 5 times risk of developing psychosis later in life. Developing depression. You're 1.8 times more likely to develop depression if you have what's called marijuana use disorder. In other words, that's something where you're actually addicted to marijuana. You're almost twice as likely to develop depression in that case. And young people who smoke marijuana are 50% more likely to develop depression. The odds of a suicide attempt are even higher, 3.5 to 7 times, depending on the study that you look at. So you're only 50%, I say only 50% more likely to think about suicide, but you're 3.5 to 7 times more likely to actually do it. So there's something about marijuana that makes it easier for people to actually commit suicide or attempt committing suicide. And then one last thing, let's talk about bipolar disorder. There's a brand new study that just came out in May, and it's the first study that actually shows a causal link between marijuana and bipolar disorder. 6.5 million people this study looked at, and it was published in Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry. It showed a 3 times risk in young men and a 2.5 times risk in young women who have cannabis use disorder versus those who don't use marijuana. And the 4 times risk is bipolar disorder with psychosis. It's a 4 times risk for young men and still a 2.5 times risk for young ladies. I could go on. There's just so many problems with marijuana, and people don't realize it. But the medical literature, I have over 300 articles that I've looked at. And there's a lot more articles that I've kind of put to the side. I just don't even have time to look at all the articles about marijuana.
Wow, that's a lot of information there. The other piece too is you're not even talking about situations where marijuana is actually laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl, obviously, in opioids is absolutely ravaging this country. Typically, these opioids and these overdoses are typically targeting young males. So if you look at it, that's the highest percentage of overdose deaths. And when I'm talking to local police, they are confiscating marijuana and finding that it is laced with fentanyl. And just understand that, what you think you need in order to get high is going to be very different if it's laced with fentanyl, and you could overshoot the mark. And now you're talking about an overdose situation where you had no idea. And this is especially true if you're getting the marijuana off the street. I would say more often than not, you are going to have a product that is laced with fentanyl. Why? Because it's cheap and it's very potent, extremely potent. And that's why you have a drug dealer that's going to add that, or it's going to be laced with this fentanyl product.
Yeah, I was on doing an interview the other day, and the person that I was on with was a former mayor. And she said that in her town, uh, just recently. I don't know the exact time frame, but there have been 17 deaths of people smoking marijuana that's laced with fentanyl. It's a huge problem. That was in Southern California.
Wow, I got to find that article because I think that is extremely eye-opening because fentanyl, even very small doses of it, will kill you. And so I think that's really what we have to be looking at. It just makes it extremely addictive. It's very cheap for a drug dealer. That's why it ends up in the supply. And when they look at these overdoses and they do toxicology reports, understand that they are finding more than whatever drug you intended to ingest. It's much more than marijuana. They do find traces of fentanyl typically in these overdoses today. No matter what drug you're using, just assume if you're getting it off the street, there's going to be fentanyl in it. So you just have to understand that. And the other thing that is really interesting to me that I want to drill down a little bit, you talked about marijuana being addictive. Can you talk a little bit more about that particular piece?
Sure. Yeah. Traditionally, we thought of marijuana as only being, I say only being psychologically addictive. Um, Psychological addiction is very powerful and it can still lead to you not being able to quit. But the problem with marijuana is if you look back 50 years ago plus, let's say at Woodstock, 1969, the average THC was 1 to 3%. Well, today it's 18 to 23%, and some of it's up to 30%. And this higher THC dose, the potency, causes true physical addiction. Today, 30% of people who smoke marijuana, that's overall, have marijuana use disorder or cannabis use disorder. That's actual addiction. And 46% of people from the age of 12 to 17 are addicted to marijuana. So almost half the people, young people who smoke marijuana, are addicted, and almost a third of all people who smoke marijuana are addicted. And by the way, legalization is shown to increase cannabis use disorder by 25% among this young group.
Let's talk about this young group because many of the listeners here are 18 years old, 19 years old. Is there anything surprising about the research that you found out about adolescent marijuana use?
Yeah, one of the big things is that there's a lot of or there's a big increase of strokes and heart attacks. As I said, if you look at strokes, there's a 16% increase in overall in strokes for young people who smoke marijuana. There's a 41% increase in something called acute ischemic stroke. It's a type of stroke. That's huge. It's really rare if you don't smoke marijuana or take drugs to have a stroke. But if you smoke marijuana, it greatly increases that. And then back to the mental health effects. If you start marijuana as a teenager, the odds of you developing schizophrenia at any point in your life is 37% higher than if you didn't smoke marijuana at all. So it not only causes problems immediately, but it can cause problems for the rest of your life. And again, we go back to schizophrenia, somewhere between 2.5 to 6 times increased risk of schizophrenia if you smoke marijuana as a teenager.
I think, we all know or we've seen perhaps the effects of marijuana smoking. People just think that, okay, this is just the short term effects. But what we're actually finding out by reading the literature is that a lot of these effects can last a lifetime. So understand that if you are using this could potentially impact you for the rest of your life. And so that's kind of what I want people to understand. What about the hidden social and economic costs of marijuana?
Yeah, there's a lot of hidden social and economic costs. One of the selling points that advocates of legalized marijuana use is that it's going to decrease crime. Well, studies show that really the opposite is true. There's a significant increase in the risk of violence. There's a paper in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence that shows a doubling of domestic violence among those who use marijuana. There's a 2017 article in Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology that examined the causes of violence, and it looked at 6,000 men, and drug use was linked to a 5-fold increase in violence. And the drug most often used in that study, they found, was marijuana. Organized crime is a big issue with marijuana. There's a lot of human trafficking victims, unfortunately, that are cultivating the cannabis that's used not only for illegal marijuana, but for the legal storefronts as well. And in many cases, operations to grow licenses operations with licenses to grow use that as a front to grow it for the illicit market. If you're looking at automobile accidents, driving under the influence is extremely dangerous. Marijuana impairs a lot of the essential skills that we need for driving. It slows reaction time. It impairs decision-making ability. It impairs coordination, and it distorts perception. Yet a lot of people drive under the influence. Centennial Institute showed that 69% of marijuana users have driven under the influence at least once, and 27% of them admit to doing this on a regular basis. And AAA Newsroom said that they estimated 14.8 million drivers report getting behind the wheel within 1 hour after smoking marijuana in the past 30 days. And so this causes a lot of problems. If you look at Washington State and Colorado, the number of fatal auto accidents doubled when they made marijuana more available. And nationwide, the percentage of fatal car crashes in 2000, it was 9%. 9% of fatal car crashes involved marijuana. In 2018, that number was more than double at 22%.
Wow.
If you're looking at you think, well, marijuana is going to make my life better. The National Institute on Drug Abuse shows that those who use marijuana, especially those who use it frequently, have lower life satisfaction, poorer mental health, poorer physical health, more relationship problems, less academic success, and less career success. And I have a ton of statistics on academic success. I'll talk about a couple of them here. Your GPA on average is going to be about 0.5 point less in those who smoke marijuana. And also there's a higher dropout rate for those who smoke marijuana. And if you're talking about career success, I won't even go into all the stats, but your career, you're just not going to be as successful on average if you're smoking marijuana, and you're 50% more likely to get fired too.
Yeah, I mean, people want to know why that is, and the reality is it's because you're not attending class. So you start suffering in terms of your GPA because you just can't attend because of the heavy marijuana use. So yes, there is definitely a correlation with academics for regular marijuana users. And just think down the line when we start talking about careers and things like that, this is going to impact you for a very, very long time with that lower GPA. I also want to talk about CBD. What is CBD? Is it safe? Is it effective?
Yeah, CBD is one of the chemicals. It's one of the cannabinoids, one of the active substances that's in the cannabis plant. CBD is supposed to not have a lot of psychoactive effects. And a lot of people believe that CBD can treat pain, anxiety, insomnia, arthritis, depression, mental health effects, headaches. I mean, you can just go on and on. But CBD is really big business. It's a $5.3 billion a year industry, including 560 million for pets. And the Mayo Clinic says that CBD hasn't been proven to do anything it's claimed to do, but CBD does have side effects such as dry mouth, drowsiness, fatigue, diarrhea, nausea, irritability. Studies show that the studies showing the safety and effectiveness of CBD are really limited. The NIH says that CBD often contains much more or much less than what the labels say. And also it can produce psychiatric effects and cognitive impairment in those who use THC. In addition, CBD can cause problems can cause liver injury, it can cause male reproductive harm, and it can have interaction with other drugs as well. And the FDA warns that CBD often contains unsafe levels of pesticides, heavy metals, and THC. 35% of CBD products in one study were shown to have THC. You can also talk about CBD with breastfeeding and pregnancy. The FDA warns that can be very dangerous to a baby. And then there's a physician from Australia, Dr. Stuart Rees, and he looks at CBD, the effects on the genome upon our DNA. And he shows that it can lead to a lot of genotoxicity, and that can cause increased cancers and congenital anomalies as well.
Wow. That's a lot. There's something out there called Delta 8 THC. What is that? Is that safe?
Yeah, Delta 8 is, well, first of all, when you're thinking about THC, most of the time we're thinking about Delta 9. That's the more potent big brother of Delta 8. But Delta 8 is often called marijuana light. Uh, it's found, it's not found in significant amounts in the cannabis plant. So the way that it's generally made, even though there's a little bit of Delta 8 in the cannabis plant, usually manufacturers take a hemp plant which has low THC, and they'll take the CBD out of that, and then they'll chemically alter that CBD and turn it into Delta 8. Delta 8 normally is about 2/3 the potency of Delta 9. And there's a lot of claims about Delta 8 as well, that on social media sites, especially, that say that it helps with depression and mental health and reduce nausea, increases appetite, gives pain relief. But the FDA warns that none of those things have been scientifically proven. It's not safe, and it's not effective. The reason that Delta 8 is growing in popularity is because in a lot of states, in fact, in most states, it's still legal. But again, it's extracted legally. But when it goes through these chemical changes, it actually, when it becomes synthetic, a lot of places, even though people tell you that it's still legal, it actually is not legal for a lot of reasons, just because of the chemical change there. The synthetic uh, uh, production of it makes it illegal in a lot of places. And Delta 8 can be a legal minefield for a lot of reasons. Often Delta 9 is higher than legal limits in Delta 8 products because it's difficult to extract the Delta 9 without extracting the Delta 8. Also, a lot of labs, most labs, can't tell the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9. So if you get drug tested and you have Delta 8 in your system, there's a good chance that you're going to lose your job. You can have problems at school, and you may have significant attorney bills as well. And Delta 8 can cause a lot of problems, as the same ones that Delta 9 can cause. And some people believe even more: paranoia, anxiety, confusion, dizziness, drowsiness, loss of consciousness. And the poison control centers get a lot of calls. When they first started following, they put this code in their database. In the first 13 months, there were 2,362 calls to poison control centers about Delta 8 related issues.
Wow. So the elephant in the room here is that this is a huge industry. I mean, you have the various states are making money off of taxing this huge industry. So I guess the question is, how do we make progress with our young people, with the college students, when so many states have legalized marijuana? What's the answer?
Yeah, one thing that politicians don't realize is, yeah, you're bringing in tax revenue, but for every dollar you bring in, there's $4.50 that you're spending to mitigate the effects, and most of that is through the burden on the healthcare system. But the marijuana industry, like you said, it's a huge industry. It's $100 billion a year industry, and they convince most people that marijuana is safe. Dr. Kevin Sabet says that they use the tactics of big tobacco, and they started this several decades ago, and they're making a more addictive product as well because of the higher THC levels. They spent a ton of money on referendums and lobbying, and it's worked. In 1991, 80% of young people believed that marijuana was dangerous, that it caused significant effects on the body. Well, today that is 21%. And those who don't believe that marijuana is dangerous are 6 times more likely to use it. So how can we overcome that? Well, we're doing it today. Hopefully we can educate people as much as possible. I really don't know of any other way that we can make a big impact here. You can talk to your legislators, read my book. Also, there's a lot more about this in there. I wish I could spend more time talking about that.
Yeah, the book is by Dr. Raymond Wiggins. It's called "Weeding Out the Lies About Marijuana." So you can go and pick that up to get a lot more information. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a huge industry. I remember when vaping first came out. it was being pitched as the safer alternative to cigarette smoking. So it's like, I feel like the same thing has really been done with marijuana. And now people think that somehow this is safe to use. And I completely agree with you. I think that people really need to get a better understanding and a better grasp of what the risks are before they put it into their body. Again, I totally believe that people have, the freedom to be able to choose what they put in their body. But I think people are just not educated, unfortunately, about all of these dangers. So I think you're doing a great job in terms of the book, in terms of coming on the podcast to talk about that. So more people are just aware of what they're putting in their body.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job as well. I appreciate all that you're doing on college campuses and with this podcast.
Yeah, I'm trying for sure. Now, we do love good food here. I mean, that's my weakness. It's not marijuana, it's just the food itself. And I know you're in the Houston area. So where should I be going for a great meal the next time I'm in Houston?
Yeah, Houston's a great food city. At one point, we claimed that we had more restaurants per capita than any large city in America. I don't know if that's still true or not. I don't know if it was ever really true, but that was a claim. I love steaks. If you want a really, really good steak, you want a restaurant with a Texas flair and great service, I love a restaurant called Taste of Texas. Great place. If you're wanting something that is just over the top service, and again, great steaks and high end atmosphere, there's something called Pappas Brothers Steakhouse. Really great place. Depends on the type of food that you want. If you're wanting Tex-Mex, there's a ton of really good places. I love Pappasitos, really great place. I love Texas barbecue. Pappas is a great place. Rudy's. There's a lot of great barbecue places here in Houston.
Man, next time I got to come for a week now, and I got to try all your recommendations. I'm never going to leave.
I could take you out every day, several times, and we could eat a lot of good food here.
That sounds like a deal. We're going to eat our way through Houston, and we'll talk about how we can solve this problem. So, listen, I appreciate everything that you do. So if our listeners, if they want to bring you in to come and speak on the dangers of marijuana on their college campus, or they want to buy your book, it's called Weeding Out the Lies About Marijuana, where should they go to connect with you?
It's not out yet. The book will be out in October or possibly November, hopefully October. But you can go to drwiggins.com. That's drwiggins.com and click on the connect button there. And those on my connection list, I'm going to let people know when the book is coming out, and you'll get a discounted price on it as well. And if you want to book me on a show or come talk to your group, you can find my information there as well on how to connect with me for that. Also, please connect with me on social media. There's links on the webpage there to connect with me. And I'm really excited about what we're about to start doing with social media. You'll want to be a part of it.
That's really exciting. All right, so go and get all of those social media links. Go and sign up for the book. So that way, as soon as that book is out, you get notified and you're going to get the discount code. So that way you're going to get it cheaper. Just go to drwiggins.com and you can find all of that information there. I'm just really excited and happy that you're tackling this issue. I do think it's a huge issue. It's an education issue, but you're battling, this huge monster industry. And so it can be difficult to get the word out, but I appreciate what you do. I think it's a noble cause and it's a worthy cause.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, our pleasure. And to our student listeners, if you enjoyed all this great information and statistics about just all of the lies that you're being fed about marijuana, please, please, please make sure that you like this particular episode. Make sure that you share it with other college students on social media so that way more people can get educated about what they're putting in their body. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're going to see you next time.